Hey guys, this is Mr. V. I'm here today to do a Dark Tower introduction video. This is for people who either want to start the Dark Tower series, which is written by Stephen King, or people who have just started the series and want to know a little bit more about it. I finished the whole series, but I've read multiple articles, forums, I watched many videos about it, to where, I just wanted to make a quick introductory video for those who are either deciding if they should go and read all the books, or just started reading it and need a little guidance, because that's what I did, and that's why I watched all those videos and read all that stuff. But anyway, let's get to the Dark Tower. People always come and ask me, I'm a Stephen King fan, and people come and ask me, what is Stephen King's best work? And it's a difficult answer because his best work is The Dark Tower. A lot of people always want to know, like, okay, what is his best work? And I've heard it on forums so many times, they're like, The Dark Tower, The Dark Tower. And, I was a Stephen King fan, and I didn't even go into it for a while because it can be pretty intimidating. You guys should know that The Dark Tower consists of 7 books, or 8 if you consider book 4.5. I consider it 8 books because book 4.5 is actually a full book. So it's like, it consists of 8 books, and it can be very intimidating. And that's why I think some people stray away from The Dark Tower, which, is for obvious reasons. I mean, it is a lot of books. But the experience of reading it is so amazing. The premise seems so simple, but Stephen King does a phenomenal job during the whole series. But what it is it can seem intimidating because, I mean, for it having a simple premise, it's just basically about a guy named Roland. He's the last gunslinger, and he needs to get to the Dark Tower. That's the basic premise of it. Yet, Stephen King was able to do 8 books worth of The Dark Tower, and the whole journey was amazing. But it's intimidating because if you're at a bookstore and you see the Dark Tower section, and if you're in the Stephen King section, you're looking at it, the Dark Tower books they're fairly long, but it's almost like, I compare it to like Harry Potter, where just like in the Dark Tower, they both started out much smaller, but then as the books got later into the series, they started getting thicker and thicker, because the Dark Tower, in book 1, it isn't as long, and then book 2 gets a little longer, and then book 3 gets longer, and then by the time you're at like book 5, it's pretty big. So that's why it can seem intimidating. But it's also because it probably seems intimidating also because book 7 is called The Dark Tower, to where if you reach it, it's a humongous book, but people probably think that is The Dark Tower. They don't realize it's a whole series and it builds up to it. So it can be very intimidating just due to the length alone. And, but, even to a Stephen King fans, I know many Stephen King fans that did not do it because of that, but I decided just to start it, but I wanted to do it the correct way. And I just started it, and then after I started, it flowed so nicely. It was amazing, and that's why I want to make this video, just to help anyone out there that may have a question or two about it. Because it flowed so nicely, and it is my absolute favorite series. I've read many other series, but The Dark Tower is my favorite. It is amazing. And I highly recommend it, because, The Dark Tower is just so much fun. Because, it's entertaining throughout the whole series. There aren't areas where it really tails off or anything like that, because I know that sometimes that can happen in a series. But it's like, it just stays, the entertainment just keeps building and keeps building. And there are so many genres he incorporates in here. And I just wrote some of them down, because one thing that should be known is that while the main character is a gunslinger, it's not just all gunfights. People think that it's just like Western. There are some Western elements in it, but, there's things like, there's a ton of action, obviously, but there's so many sci-fi elements that I can't even There's so many different sci-fi elements. There's horror, there's mystery, there's even romance, there's drama, there's so many different types of fantasy. And that's just off the, top of my head when I was writing some things down. And there's just so much in it that he incorporates in the Dark Tower series that it's like basically everybody can find something in the Dark Tower. And you know, his writing, Stephen King's writing, is amazing. He's an amazing author in his writing style. He knows how to just captivate the reader, and he just knows what to do, because the Dark Tower also has a ton of suspense, and it just makes you want to keep moving on to the next. And it's another thing that's great about this is that there's a consistent pace. After book one, there's a consistent pace of the series. It's not like, as I said earlier, it's not like one part just all of a sudden it gets boring for a part of the series, or you know, it's not like that at all. So there's a consistent pace, which is very nice. And you know, and one thing that is so much fun is that he throws so many curveballs in the series. Is that, like, you know, you'll think that, okay, Roland has to get from point A to point B, and you'll be like, okay, it's fine. And sometimes he gets from point A to point B. Other times you'll be like, all right, he has to get from point A to point B, and partway through, something just completely crazy happens. And then you're like, okay, how does he get to point B now? Or can he even get there? How does he deal with that new situation? And then there are times where Stephen King even throws like a double curveball, and then it's just like, it's just a lot. It's just a lot of fun, and he just does it to the top in the Dark Tower series, and that's why it really is amazing. And you know, it's fun because if you are a fan, like myself, I was a fan. But I didn't realize, I mean, people had always said it, I didn't realize how many links to other books it had, which are always a fun element. But the nice thing for people who aren't consistent Stephen King readers is that you can read The Dark Tower without having read any of his other books and still enjoy it. You know, that's an amazing part. It has like both. It's like for the fans, they can catch the little Easter eggs. But for people that have not read the specific book, it doesn't matter. You know, they still have just as much entertainment with that. So, you know, that's something nice. And another nice part is that it kind of, it had a great ending. And what I mean by a great ending, it doesn't mean that it has like a super happy ending or anything like that, because I won't say how it ends. But a great ending is that he just wrapped the whole series up. You didn't feel disappointed at the end. It's like when I'm thinking back right now, you know, there are sometimes different novels, even just a big novel, you can sometimes be disappointed at the end and just be like, oh, that ending just did not work, or didn't kind of answer everything. Or you can watch a TV show and just be like, oh, that show just had a horrible ending after you stuck with the series for so long. And that's why many people are disappointed by TV series finales. You know, things like that. But I thought he just did a great job of wrapping everything up, and it was pretty rare to have that in a basically a really nice series. But despite, you saw, this is why I recommend The Dark Tower to you guys. Like, this is why you guys should be reading The Dark Tower. But there are a few things I want to give as an introduction, as I said, just so you guys know to tread with a little caution. And what I mean by that is that you want to know how Stephen King's writing style is. Sometimes you want to have read one of his books, or maybe even two of his books. I know that can seem bad to try to get into this series, and if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But you definitely want to know his writing style, because Stephen King, he loves to do character development, and he loves to do scene development. And he does character development and scene development, and it adds to the end a lot. It adds to whatever book you're reading. It adds to it a lot, because then you can visualize a character a lot more, visualize a scene, and it means a lot more when whatever starts happening happens. You know, so, but he loves to do that, and it's something that most people don't know about his writing. Because the reason I bring this up is because the first book of the series is a very difficult book to get through. There's always discussions between different people about where the first book should rank and all that. a decent amount of people rank the first book as the worst of the Dark Tower series. It doesn't mean go to Wikipedia and just read the summary, as some people may say online. It doesn't mean that, but the first Dark Tower is very difficult because there's two reasons it's very difficult. One is initially when he started the Dark Tower in the 70s, it was like 5 separate short stories, and then when they wanted to make it a book, he kind of like had to somehow mend it all together, and it was much more difficult to do that, and you can kind of tell in the book. But it's also a lot of the story is the character development of your main guy, Roland. It's the character development. And it's a 300-page book where it could be tough to do character development of Roland. But it's like, that's why I say it's a very difficult book in the beginning to get through. And there's still areas that are fun in the book. I'm not going to say it was a horrible book, but, you know, I put it below average. But it was like, because there are still some action areas. You got to learn who Roland is. You got to do, there's a bunch of things that I can't say without spoiling anything. But you got to do a lot, you got to see Roland go through a lot and all that. So, but the first book is very difficult. And the second book, though, it picks up steam very quickly, and you can tell that the second book is so much better because it picks up very quickly, and you can tell at that point that Stephen King is developing a whole series. And you can see that his thought process is much better and much clearer in how he's going to do some of these things. And you can tell that immediately in the second book, that it is so different from book one. And if you look online, there are many people that when they're comparing book one to book two, it's so different. And I think it's because Stephen King also knew he was going to be developing a series at that point instead of multiple different stories and trying to somehow mend them together. But yeah, you can tell. And it is great because, well, and I have a story that happened in high school. It was years ago. It was before the final Dark Tower even got released. And my friend, he just loved the Dark Tower, and he kept telling me to read the Dark Tower. So I read the first Dark Tower book, but I had never read Stephen King before that. You know, I had seen one or two of his movies, but I never read the actual Stephen King book, so I didn't know the style that he wrote in. But as I also said, the book one is also very, very difficult to fully get into. Not only is it fully character development, but just the writing, just the stories are harder to get into. And after book one, it was like I didn't want to continue. My friend did not tell me some of these things. Like, if I had started book two and even gotten partway through, I would have been able to see the difference in a second. Like, oh my God, now the series is picking up. Now it makes a lot more sense. Like, it's flowing a lot better. But my friend never let me know that when I was in high school. And he just told me to read it, and then I quit after book one. And then I didn't want to revisit it for so many years. You know, it was like I started to become a fan of Stephen King, but even then I didn't want to read The Dark Tower because I always had that in my memory. So that's why I want to make sure that you guys are properly prepared to take on book one. And I'll give you some tips later about what to do when you guys are reading it. But, you know, I just want to make sure of that and just show the whole introduction, because there are two paths you guys can take when reading this. Just a slight history. Stephen King took about, I think it was 25 or 30 years to develop the full story of The Dark Tower. And what he did was he didn't write it book one to book two to book 3, 4, 5, and just write it in a row like most authors do. What he did was he wrote other books in between, to where he would release part 2, and then he would release like other non-related books, and then years later release part 3, and then write other non-related books. You know, he continually would write non-related books and continue to release those. Stephen King has released, I don't even know how many books, but he's released a ton of books. He's released over 60 or 70 books already. So you guys should be aware of that he didn't just sit down and write it book 1 through book 8, that there was other things released between it. But the reason I bring this part up is because of that, there are two paths you can take, as I just said. The first path is you can take where you just read books 1 through 8 straight through, and you will still have a great time. I guarantee you will have a great time, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff in there, as I said earlier in the video. The other path is a more expanded path. Now, it's not where you're going to read every single book he ever did, but I found out that a lot of his books, as I stated earlier too, I found out that a lot of his books actually linked to the Dark Tower. Now, it doesn't mean that you need to have read those books, but a lot of books link to the Dark Tower in some way, and not every book linked to the Dark Tower. And I just need to make it very clear, is that the other books are stories completely in their own. But sometimes there'll be a character or a situation that will link to the Dark Tower, or a character will be brought into the Dark Tower. A good example is the book The Stand. Is its own completely separate novel about, there was something called, I think, the super flu, and it killed 97% of the people. And then it's about survival among which leader are you guys going to choose and all that, and one of them is Randall Flagg. And, you know, The Stand was its own separate story. And then later on, you see later on in the Dark Tower, Randall Flagg is brought in as a character. So, and then when they bring him in as a character, they explain who Randall Flagg is, to where if you didn't read The Stand, you would still know who Randall Flagg is. But if you read The Stand, you know so much more about Randall Flagg now, because you really know who he is as a person. It's the same with Father Callahan in Salem's Lot. It's like, when they bring him into the Dark Tower, they explain who Father Callahan is. Meaning you did not have to read Salem's Lot, but if you did read Salem's Lot, you know, like, way more about Father Callahan, and it heightens the experience so much more. So I found out, yeah, that there are 2 different ways to read the Dark Tower. So I'm going to give you guys some numbers right now about how the length is. And that's why I don't want it to freak any of you guys out. But it's like, if you read the Dark Tower just all the way straight through, it would be 8 books, as I said. It'd be 8 books. Whereas I took the journey of going, I'm trying to remember the exact number, I think I did 17 or 18 novels or novellas in a row. And I took advice from people online of which character, which book to link where, and all of that, to where I expanded. I read about 9 or 10 extra books written by Stephen King that linked to the Dark Tower. So, you know, that is completely up to you guys, how you want to go about it. I felt the expanded way was phenomenal. But I need to stress, non-stop, that those extra books have their own completely separate story, and you don't have to have read them to enjoy or understand the Dark Tower. So, you know, please understand that. And it's, you know, it's completely up to you how you guys want to read it. But I want to give you guys some quick tips on how I feel you guys should read the Dark Tower series. And then the first set of tips I'm going to give is just for someone who wants to read books 1 through 8 just straight in a row. Books 1, 2, 3, and just keep going. If you stay a little bit after that one, I'm going to give you guys some extra tips for the ones who want to read some of the tie-in books that tie into it, because I'll give you guys some tips for that as well, but that will be after the original. So some of the tips I had written down, my advice, you know, is, I already said, you want to know Stephen King's writing. You definitely want to know Stephen King's writing. I said he does a lot of character development. Really know that. And just know his writing style, because if you don't want to read his books, then at least know that book 1 is basically all character development, and book 1 kind of isn't the easiest to digest. That, you know, you want to get part way through at least part 2, which is actually my next bullet point, is to finish at least halfway through the second book. If you guys want to start the series, finish at least halfway through the second book. The reason I say that is because so many people read The Dark Tower 1 and do not enjoy it, but then they don't even touch for that reason they don't even touch The Dark Tower 2, when The Dark Tower 2 really starts to get things rolling and makes it so much more enjoyable. And then things really start to feel like the series. So that's why you want to get at least halfway through book 2. I recommend you finish book 2, but if generally, if you by the time it's got to the halfway point, you guys kind of know if you'll like it or not. But again, you want to have read all of book 1 and then at least halfway through book 2, and you will see the difference in book 2. Another thing I would say is, if you don't enjoy the second book, I recommend that you guys just don't continue reading The Dark Tower. You're not forced to read it, things like that. Some people I've talked to think that, I really want to read The Dark Tower because that's supposed to be his best. But it's like, if you just don't enjoy it, you don't have to read it. There is someone online in a forum I saw that they took until book 3 to get into it, but I think it's pretty rare to have to read 3 books to get into a series. To where I'd say, if you guys finish book 2 and you still don't like it, that I would just stop reading it. But if you guys get into book 2 and you enjoy it, I'd say have a plan to finish it. What I mean by that is, you don't have to be like, I better finish it by this date, or I better read 1 book a month type of thing. What I mean by have a plan to finish it is that some people stop. It's like they will get to books 3 and then they'll get to book 4 and they're enjoying it, and then something will happen, or they'll just put the book down for a bit. They'll take a month off, and that's fine. That's perfectly normal. But then they just stop and they never go back to it. They go to do something else, and then it becomes 2-3 years later. And there's people on forums still being like, well, they don't remember some of the characters. Do they reread the whole series up to that point, or what do they do? They want to know how it ends. And it's just, that's why I say, don't, if you do it, make some kind of plan to basically almost like stick it out to an extent, because you will enjoy it, but you just don't want to stop partway through. It would be like, I did that with the Harry Potter series, where I got to book 4. After I finished book 4, I kept stopping for some reason. And then I finally finished it. But I kept stopping at that point in the series. And then you have to go back and sometimes reread it. And that's why you have a plan to kind of stick it out. And it's also, don't take too long between books. That kind of links to my last point, is don't take too long. Because, as you just heard me say, you may start to forget the characters, forget the vibe, everything. It doesn't mean you can't read other books in between. You guys do whatever you want. But don't take too long. Like, I wouldn't suggest taking more than 6 months between books, because then you'll start to forget some of it. Even though he released it years apart, many of the people that were reading it at the time reread the previous book before his new release. So that's why you don't want to have to do that. To where I would recommend that you don't take even 6 months off between reading the books, but after you finish one, to starting a new one. Yes, don't let the page length intimidate you. I covered that in the first part of the video, but so many people get intimidated by the page length. They're like, oh my God, how am I going to finish it? That they go to the bookstore or they see Amazon and they're like, wow, if I do the whole series. But you have to remember, don't look at it as one, of course you're looking at it as one humongous series, but just take it book by book by book. It's just like Harry Potter. Harry Potter, the first few books were a little, there weren't as many pages, and then they kept adding more and more pages to the final book. It was very thick. It's the same with the Dark Tower. So, don't be intimidated by the page count. It's just focus on the book that you want to read next, and don't look like 3 or 4 books down the line. Make sure you also don't use Wikipedia much. What I don't want people using Wikipedia for the Dark Tower is because there's a few things. Sometimes people will feel like, you can just Wikipedia the Dark Tower 1, and that's not advisable. I say that you should still read the Dark Tower 1, and that's why I don't use Wikipedia just to read the summary, because you will miss a lot if you do it. But you also want to be very careful, because there are times where it's like in a book you may think, like the first 20% of book 4 is not good or it's a little bit boring. You may feel that, but then you'll find out that the next 80% is amazing and he was building it up on purpose. And I have heard people use Wikipedia to think like, oh, I wanted to skip something, and then, or even skipping chapters, they'll skip a chapter and then be completely lost when like the big climax happens. They won't fully grasp the idea. So that's why I don't recommend using any of those, just using any of the internet search functions for that, because you don't want to misunderstand it. And something you want to be very careful on as well is you want to be very careful when browsing online for spoilers. Because I was lucky to only have come across like mild spoilers, I think twice. But there are people that you can come across a big spoiler and that can just ruin like a whole section, you know, and it's just, you don't want to come across the spoilers. And that's why sometimes in like a Wikipedia page, when they're talking about a character, about who the character is, they will tell you something about the character, about how they were evil, but they were actually, or they were playing evil, but they were actually good, or they were playing good and they were actually playing evil, or they will talk about if the person survived or died or killed someone or anything like that. It's like, you don't want to find any of that out. You want to find it out while you are reading. So that's why just be very careful of the internet for the spoilers, is that, you know, that is a big concept. So those are for the people that want to read just books 1 through 8, just in a row. You know, I'm sure you guys will have a great time. As I said, it's a great series, and I highly, highly recommend that. But for people who want the expanded version, the one that I did, here are some tips for the people that want the expanded one to see some of the tie-in books. The first thing is, I need to repeat it, is that the tie-in books are their own completely standalone novels. They only tie into the Dark Tower later because Stephen King wanted to tie them back into it. But they're their own completely separate novels, so they're entertaining in their own way. If you read Salem's Lot, you're going to enjoy it just because of Salem's Lot. But then if you read in the Dark Tower, you'll see how he ties something back in to the Dark Tower, things like that. So please understand that. It's a completely separate novel and it does not need to be read. But I recommend using this way is because, you know, first look at, there's many lists online that show you recommended tie-ins. You know, they'll be like, this book ties in, and there are many lists online, and compare some of the lists. I recommend actually just look at the book titles and compare it with other book titles instead of reading the descriptions, because sometimes the descriptions will tell you too much. They'll be like, you need to read it for this very specific reason, or, you know, I think sometimes the descriptions tell you too much. So I just looked at the book titles and I started to notice that it was like, generally most of the books had a most of the recommendations were pretty consistent in that a lot of them recommended about the same books. So you can see it. It was just sometimes where they placed it depended on it. There are some lists that was more, some not as much. So just know there are many, and that, you know, you want to compare the lists, you know, but I think no matter what list you use, start with Dark Tower 1, because there are other lists, there are lists online that say don't start with the Dark Tower, start with a different book. I say you start with Dark Tower 1. It is completely up to you based off if you read something in a list like that and you think that, oh, you want to start with that book instead, you know, maybe that one sounds more entertaining, but I still say start with the Dark Tower 1 if you guys are going the expanded route. And just like I said previously, you know, you don't want to take too much time off between books, between the start of one and finish of another. Even when doing the expanded list, you don't want to take too much time off. And I saw some lists would do that, where they would be like, they would put like 3 big books right in the middle, or between like books 5 and 6, you'd be reading like 3 really thick books. And then it's like, by the time you'd finish those 3 thick books, you would have already forgotten some of the aspect, and you would have taken multiple months just to read those 3 books. So you just don't want to take too much time off, and that's why I made up my own list. I can post the list where I just would sometimes move the books just slightly so that it was like I didn't have to read 3 humongous books in a row type of thing. So that's my recommendation. And I would say do not read more than 20 books total. You don't want to read more than 20 books total. I have seen lists, many of the lists have anywhere, the original series is 8 books. Many of the lists have anywhere from 15 to 20 books on there. Novels and novellas as well. But they have anywhere from 15 to 20. Most of them do. I've also seen lists that have like 30 or even more than 30. I don't think you need the smallest Easter egg or anything like that. The list that I put together and I based it on was just, I saw consistent books that were being mentioned, but it was also the articles that I read were like, we're doing it because these are the ones that they either played a major character or that town played a major role or somehow that book played a major role in the Dark Tower. And that's the only reason they included it. So that's why I would say you don't need more than 20 books on a list, because there are some that it's like they have ones that are like over 30 books, and I just think that would be ridiculous. So that's my recommendation. Again, I hope you guys go out and read the Dark Tower series, as I think it's a phenomenal series. It captures all these different things, these different elements of genres from sci-fi and fantasy to like Western style to even romance, and then there's drama, and there is just, and then it's like it just flows so smoothly and everything to where I hope you guys go out and enjoy it. I hope this introductory video helps. If you guys disagree with anything, please comment below, and I will add the lists that I went through, the way I read the Dark Tower series. I'll comment on that below. But yes, if you disagree, please comment below. If you have any questions, comment below. I hope you click the subscribe button. But most of all, I hope you guys just go get the Dark Tower and enjoy the series. Thank you for watching my video. This is Mr. V. Enjoy the Dark Tower.